This is the moment we've been waiting for. Since the hours we gathered together on a night in November, painfully aware of the long fight ahead. Since the day we decided that we would not give in and grab the hand of our nearest neighbor and march to the streets. Since the moment millions joined the chorus to tell the world we would not stand for injustice against any one of us. We marched, we rallied, we fought, we steeled ourselves, and we rose up as corruption tore through the White House like a wildfire. We rose up as our country changed in ways that were unrecognizable, and we showed up for every single battle. While those at the top stoked the fires of division, each day Americans made the choice to come together. We are still in the streets, we are still fighting, knowing that what we fight for matters more than anything. And this is the moment we've been waiting for. This is our opportunity to reject the politics of hate, chaos, division, and change the course of history. This November, we have an opportunity to elect a leader who will join us as we build an America for all. The moment where we grab our family, our friends, and show up to change the world.
Can you believe we're at episode 8? Happy Thursday to everyone. Blessings and best wishes. Reggie Hubbard here with the Politics and Flows Big Ideas Edition, episode 8. Today featuring Mike Siegel from Texas 10. But before we get to my buddy Mike, who honestly, and actually quite ironically, I met about 2 years ago to the date as he came through Washington in his first run. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So y'all, we're 47 days from the general election. And again, I don't mention this for any anxiety-laden response. You know, this is the season that we've all been hoping for, leading up to the moment we've all been waiting for. A chance to get out of this farcical nightmare of the Trump reality and get towards doing the business of the country, whether it be on climate change, social justice, or all these other issues that we all hold dear. We want jobs that are safe and pay living wages, right? We want to help people feel safe and secure, not just from police violence, but also from government attacks. And I want to lead with the same sentiment that I offered yesterday, paraphrasing my friend and fellow teacher, Ethan Nichtern. You know, our default way of political storytelling has failed us, y'all. Like, this is not a sport. It's not a game. You know, conventional wisdom and reporting of politics as a sporting contest and as election as a horse race don't serve our collective best interests, right? I reject that false equivalency, which is part of the reason why we're doing this Big Idea series. You know, this is not a game. People's lives are on the line. A Biden-Harris victory in November means that attacks on certain communities from the government will cease. A Democratic House and Senate means that people will have expanded access to health care, voting rights and economic opportunity, access to technology, and access to an increased quality of life. It's time to us to take this stand with moral clarity and conviction against this farcical false equivalency of the Trump administration. Like, this is enough already. So the chat is open. Feel free to holler at me and let me know where you're at. But before we get to our guest, as a reminder, Move On is increasingly focused on making sure you have updated information on how and where we vote in the upcoming election. So you can either vote by mail, vote in person early, drop off your mail-in ballot or drop off your paper ballot, or vote in the polls on election day. And so we have our Your Vote is Power campaign and our Mobilize to Win efforts so that everyone can plug in to reach high potential voters as well as mobilize their networks through via vote tripling and other techniques. So 2 reminders before we get to Mike. Again, it's highly likely that in all races from president on down, that voting returns, the counting of those returns will not be finished on November 3rd. So we don't need to go crazy. We don't need to buy into whatever the Trump rhetoric is going to be. Like, we need to prepare ourselves psychologically for the fact that it takes time to count hundreds of thousands or millions of votes. And it's important for a functioning democracy to take the time to have those votes counted and not fall into false rush, which will be pushed by the Trump administration. So let's be prepared for that. It's highly likely that the votes will not be fully counted on the evening of November 3rd. So as such, let us be prepared and take care of one another in that instance. And you know, there's no way that we can let Donald Trump take this narrative from us. And the second, and this is why we're here today, we cannot get so focused on removing Donald Trump that we ignore the necessity of taking back the Senate and expanding the House majority. We need Democratic majorities in the House, in the Senate, and in the White House to create the world that we're hoping for or at least to create the conditions for building that world that we hope for. So for those of you that want to get involved in our efforts, you can text "We Got Us" to 668-366 to get involved in our voter mobilization efforts. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mike Siegel. Mike Siegel is Democrat nominee running to unseat Mike McCall in Texas's 10th congressional district. Mike has spent his career in public service as a school teacher, as a civil rights lawyer, and as an advocate for communities left out of the political process. Powered by a grassroots campaign in 2018, which Move On proudly supported in 18. We're very proud to support him again. Mike closed a 15-point gap and came the closest to unseating McCall of any Democrat to seek the seat. And I think McCall's been in since 2005, so that's pretty significant. Mike is the reason that Texas 10 is a top target for national Democrats in 2020, and he's back to finish the job. I'll also add that I've known Mike for about 2 years and met him on his initial run for Congress as he was passing through D.C. And Mike, it's been amazing to watch you mature as a candidate, and to watch you refine your message, and to navigate a complicated COVID-impacted primary, and now be in the home stretch to finish the job that you started last cycle. Mike and I had coffee at the Corner Bakery right around the corner from the Senate side on Capitol Hill. And I remember you being hungry for advice and just working very hard, even when people weren't responsive to you. It's like you had this fire and conviction that's very palpable and needed in this time, and you were a testament to hard work, the power of your convictions, and how the synergy of those two yield resilience and success. So welcome to Big Ideas, Politics and Flows, Mike. Great to see you again.
Right on, Reggie. Well, it's wonderful to see you, sir. I wish we could be there in person. Obviously, in this Zoom era, this is about as close as we can get, but I can still feel the connection through the airwaves here, and so excited to be working with Move On to flip this race and, advance the cause of progressives here in Texas and across the country.
So tell me a little bit how the campaign's going. Again, it's definitely great to see you. And I remember when I first met you, I was like, this is my dude, man. So not only the Bernie Sanders connection, but just hard fought dedication to progressive values. So tell me how the campaign's going.
Well, it's fantastic. Last cycle when I was running in this race, I would call people up, reach out to different major organizations, and folks would say, well, you seem like a great guy, Mike. I like your work as a school teacher or a civil rights lawyer, but you don't have a chance in heck of winning. This is a completely unwinnable race, so I'm not going to give my money or send my resources your way. But because of that work we all did, on the grassroots level in 2018, we've changed the perception. And this is now a top target, a winnable race. And that's reflected in the coalition we're building, the resources that are coming our way, the way this race is being covered, and even the way my opponent is responding. I mean, he didn't even say my name in 2018. And now he's attacking me 3 times a day on Twitter, 4 times on Sunday, of course, calling me a socialist, all that kind of stuff. And to me, he's running scared. And so I'm extremely optimistic. We built a wonderful coalition, and 46 days to finish the job. So feeling good.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that you built a coalition. You've actually built a movement, right? So props to you for sticking at it, because you had a really tight primary. Not tight, but it was just crowded. So the primary, you did the work in 2018 to show it was possible, and you were rewarded by the good work that you did in 2020 by everyone and their mama running for the seat, right? So for you to still come out on top is awesome. So tell me about the debate that just happened. So what are some of the main points that you have from the debate that you had with McCall, and just tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay, sorry about that. So we actually haven't debated. We've challenged Michael McCall to a debate, but he's refused to respond. And this is a guy who hasn't held a public event in the district in 11 years, not a single town hall, no events with, unscripted Q&A, and even, has refused to show up to screening interviews. The Austin Chronicle or the Austin Statesman, the major newspaper here, he didn't show up to that screening with me. This is a guy that's ducking me every chance of the way. So we've pushed this public demand for debate. We've got that out there, and that might have been the confusion, but we're hoping he'll show up at some point, but he hasn't yet.
I actually appreciate the confusion because it makes it seem even more ridiculous. I thought that you were going to be like, it was great, but the fact that you offered and he hasn't accepted, and he's been in Congress since 2005, you should show up for your constituents, right? So I think that's the beautiful thing is I actually appreciate the confusion because it shows that you're working hard to try not only hold him accountable, but to have a debate in the spirit of our democracy, and he just wants to stay entitled and empowered. Mike, you're the third candidate that we've had from Texas. We only had 8 episodes, and one of which was the pilot, right? So, like, out of 8 episodes, there have been 3 candidates from Texas. So, what's happening in Texas, right? Because conventional wisdom, as early as 2019, would have said you're wasting your time. And bear in mind that conventional wisdom is often wrong. But what's happening in Texas, man? What's the word?
Well, I love it. Thank you for shining a light here. And, I love the bolo tie. Looking good there, Reggie. Sporting a little Austin culture here. But, big picture, Texas has always had this populist beating heart. I mean, you can go back 100 years, the populist father. I mean, there's this history here of popular movements. And at different points, it's been suppressed and forgotten. But I think what's been happening last several years is, especially in the cities, but also on the border towns, even in the rural areas, folks are like, well, if the National Democratic Party, I love my National Democrats, but there's been a lot of ignoring of what's happening here in Texas, not a lot of investment. And folks just have this, well, let's do it ourselves thing. And the Bernie campaign was a part of it. When Beto ran for Senate in 2018, that was a part of it. But it's also been other community struggles. One way I got into this was I was the city attorney for the city of Austin when they passed a Show Me Your Papers law in Texas. And it was modeled after that Arizona law, and it kind of came after Trump took office. And we had a county sheriff in the Austin area who basically did something completely non-controversial. She said, maybe we shouldn't deport every single person convicted of a serious crime. We'll turn you over to ICE, but let's not turn everybody over. If it's been a jaywalking offense, maybe your family shouldn't be torn apart. And right. From that, the state accused us of being a sanctuary city. And from that, we're not, truthfully, but from that, they passed a law called Senate Bill 4, which basically empowered police to act as immigration agents to basically question anyone they suspected of being an undocumented immigrant, to make folks show your papers. And we knew that was going to lead to racial profiling. And this massive kind of community-based movement sprung up where activists were mobilizing, for example, the city of Austin, where I was a city attorney. They convinced the mayor and council to basically start a lawsuit to sue the governor. And I happened to be there. I've been a longtime civil rights lawyer. One day, my boss, the city attorney, said, does anybody want to sue the governor? I said, I do, please. And, but from there, it became this huge statewide battle. The biggest cities in Texas joined together. It wasn't just Austin, it was El Paso, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. The first time in anyone's memory, the biggest cities joined together to sue the state on behalf of the immigrant community to stop racial profiling. And this was before Beto ran for Senate. And that gave me so much courage. The idea that there's this progressive beating heart, this idea of Texas being a red state is not true. And then if we mobilize in districts like this one and across the state, we can change the politics here. And so it's basically in solidarity with movements like that for immigration justice, for voting rights, for criminal justice reform, for clean air, clean water, that I have drawn the inspiration and that we've started to build what I would call an unstoppable coalition to flip this seat and change the politics of the state.
Beautiful answer. And tell me more a bit about Texas 10. I mean, I know that everything in Texas is big, but there are specifics to the district because of gerrymandering. So tell me about what Texas 10 is comprised of demographically and otherwise. So tell me about your district.
This is a district that historically went from Austin to the west. It was the Hill Country District. Lyndon B. Johnson was a representative here, Jake Pickle, even Lloyd Doggett. But they gerrymandered it, like you said, Tom DeLay, Karl Rove, and they basically made it go from Austin, then it crosses 7 rural counties to the east and ends up in the Houston suburbs, these places that are historically extremely conservative. But because of the way Texas is changing, Austin has become even more densely packed with Democrats. And then the Houston side, which was historically, if I can say it, basically a white flight kind of suburb area where people moved out of the city in the 80s because they didn't want the diversity. They wanted to flee from that. And now it's become much more diverse. So you've got these, Latino neighborhoods, African-American neighborhoods, South Asian communities. And so basically it's 3 different regions. It's urban Austin, rural counties, and then suburban Houston. And it's all smashed together. It was supposed to be permanent Republican. McCall, the first time he ran, he didn't even have a Democratic opponent. He won his first race by 60-some%. He was winning his races by 20 and 30% until I ran in 2018. We narrowed that down to 4% in one cycle. But you've got it's a majority white district, but you've got an historic black college, Prairie View A&M, in Waller County. You've got a significant AAPI community. You've got black and Latino folks in the rural towns as well as on the Houston and Austin sides. And you've got a lot of folks that have been completely ignored by this guy McCall, who is not accountable to the people. He basically accepts more money from corporations than human beings. And he hasn't felt like he has to serve the people here. And so that's what's created the opportunity for this progressive campaign to step into the breach.
I mean, I love that the fact, I mean, the job of a representative is to represent the people that sent you there, right? It's not just corporate interests. So I appreciate the fact that you're touching everyone. So talk to me a little bit more about what specifically made you want to run again, right? So I know why you ran in 2018. Most people who would, they'd be like, I tried once. I did what I was supposed to do. But what made you want to run again and offer yourself as a candidate in 2020?
Well, it was that we had built all this momentum and really built this, special culture and community, and all these relationships. It's a form of equity, right? It's like we all interlinking relationships and communities and alliances, and I didn't think I could pass it off. I mean, you mentioned that two people challenged me in the primary. They spent $3.5 million against me because they saw that whoever's the nominee is going to have a great chance to win. But I didn't think they were going to mobilize, for example, the workers, the unions I've built relationships with, the environmentalists, including these youth from the Sunrise Movement, all these different constituencies that we've been reaching out to. It's a very tenuous thing that could be lost in the handoff. And I thought that we've taken it this far. It wasn't a one-cycle job. If you're climbing Mount Everest, you have to establish a base camp first. And so I felt like we had established this point where from here, we could launch and finish the job. And, how many chances in your life do you have to be a United States congressperson? It's a pretty rare job. And so I just wanted to feel like I was giving it everything I could.
And tell me a little bit more about some of the ideas that you hope to enact, not only that represent the district, but represent the nation. So one of the things that we've seen that Trump has done is he has everyone running scared or like manic, like him. And as a individual, but also as a yoga teacher, like my job is to get folks to dream again, right? So what are some of your dreams? What are some of your big ideas that you have, not only for Texas 10, but for the United States?
That's wonderful. So, I mean, like you suggest, I mean, I'm going to go to Congress. I think we need the Voting Rights Act to be reauthorized. I'm going to join with the Progressive Caucus to push forward, universal health care, national jobs program, some of these essential building blocks to building, a fair and just economy. But I think the issue where I can provide the greatest leadership is on climate and on the environment. I mean, this is a district that unites a strong environmental community in Austin. It traverses rural areas where there's a major coal plant in Fayette County. And then it ends up in the suburbs of Houston, an area that is, basically economically powered by the oil and gas industry, but has also faced 500-year flood events in 5 years. I mean, Hurricane Harvey, you might have heard about, but there's been so many storms. And these are supposed to be once in a lifetime, once in 20 lifetime storms, but they're now happening every year. And so there's a chance to talk about what a Green New Deal would look like. And, getting past the hashtag, dispelling the confusion, we're talking about a national jobs program to confront climate change and also economic inequality, like the New Deal. It took on multiple problems at once. It put America back to work. It put us in a position to beat fascism, in Western Europe and abroad during World War II. And this is a similar moment where we need to mobilize, create jobs, use federal resources to empower workers to build the economy, renewable future. And I think here in Texas, if I can win this campaign talking about a Green New Deal, and if I can unite labor unions, including fossil fuel workers who run the refineries, who build the pipelines, with the environmentalists, and basically replace the member of Congress who has more invested in oil and gas than anyone else. Michael McCall has more stock in oil and gas than anyone else in Congress. He takes huge money from big oil. This could be inspirational. And so winning this race by itself would be huge progress, in terms of protecting our planet. But then also, if I could develop some prototype programs, because the original New Deal was 15 years of legislation. It wasn't like it was a movement, right? And so if we can develop, for example, a plan to dismantle this coal plant and build something new, productive industry that will be good for the environment, will put people to work, that could then become a building block for this broader project we have to take on to protect our planet.
So that's that. I love the beauty of reimagining is it also allows us to get in touch with our history, right? So most people don't know. They're like the New Deal. Well, FDR was president for 4 terms, right? So like it wasn't just 1932 and that's it, right? Like it had to be. It was iterative. Like it met the needs of the moment, and then as those needs shifted, the legislation shifted, as opposed to what's happening now on the Republican side. Where they're sticking their head in the ground, like what fires in California, what hurricanes, and people are really feeling the impacts of climate change, and for whatever reason, it hasn't impacted the government, or at least legislatively, in terms of the Senate Republican caucus. I want to shift gears a little bit, Mike, and talk, because you have been a civil rights attorney, so especially in light of everything that's happened with Brother Floyd, with Sister Taylor, with Brother Blake, with Brother Arbery. Talk to me a little bit about like what racial justice and social justice look like to you.
Right on. And my apologies if my internet's blipping out a little bit here. But big picture, the way I look at what happened with George Floyd and the movement for Black Lives is, it's personal and it's global. I mean, obviously, we need a more just society. We need racial equality. We need to dismantle the legacy of white supremacy in this country. We need to root out racist factions within our police departments. We need to change how we think of public safety. I mean, the idea that we're talking about this hashtag defund the police, which doesn't even get at this bigger question of public safety. I mean, public safety includes those fires in California and Oregon. It includes a health pandemic that's killed upwards of 200,000 Americans, 15,000 Texans. But also, in terms of George Floyd in that moment, I think about my daughter, Malika. I mean, I married a Nigerian woman. I fell in love a summer in 1999, Houston, Texas. My wife and Detsu and I were teachers in Houston, Texas. Are you still hearing me,
Yeah, you're
Reggie?
good. Yep.
Okay, good. And so, I'm in this beautiful, multicultural, multiracial relationship, raising 2 children here in the state of Texas. And I want Texas to be safer for them. If I can tell you just one story, my daughter, Malika, was selling Girl Scout cookies in the spring, before all this started. And, some of you who have children at home, that the way Girl Scout cookies go, the parents buy the cookies and then the kids sell them and you get the money back, right? And so she's selling these cookies. And one of the days she's selling these cookies, we didn't realize it at the time, but she was paid with a counterfeit $20 bill. Mm. And later, when we went to deposit the money in the bank, we found this bill. And it looked almost identical, just felt a little different. And my wife spotted it. And it was on my desk when I heard how George Floyd was killed by this police officer in Minneapolis. And so to think through this idea of how this man went to the store to buy some supplies at the grocery store, and the police were called because he offered this bill, and so-called forgery in process, and they ended up on the pavement with a knee on his neck and was strangled to death by an officer who had 18 complaints against him, something like that. And it made me realize, well, how many things had to happen for George Floyd to be killed? I mean, if I had taken this $20 bill on my desk and gone to the store and paid for something with it, and the shopkeeper was like, oh, that's not real, do you think that shopkeeper would have called the police? No. I mean, it probably would have been laughed off. Oh, that's a mistake. Do you have something else to pay? The police never would have been called in the first place. And of course, I never would have ended up on the pavement with a knee on my neck. But then my daughter, Malika, she's 8. If she had gone to the store with that bill, yeah, I guess she probably wouldn't have been deemed a threat. But in this country, at what age, if you have brown or black skin, are you deemed a threat? If she was 10 years old, would the police have been called? 12 years old? And so this is personal for me. I mean, I'm a human rights, civil rights lawyer. I know we need a more just society legally and politically, but it's also I'm raising these kids in Texas, and I want Texas to be safe for my kids. And so this is a movement that means so much to so many of us, the movement for Black Lives. And I'm really discouraged how the media tries to characterize it. A few windows get broken in a protest, and that's what we're going to call this movement. This is a massive civil movement for political change that's, we're focused on eradicating the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow in this nation, and a legacy that unfortunately continues to live on in our police departments. And so, I mean, it's so important for me. And we need to be able to talk about public safety without getting trapped by this idea, well, do you support the police or not? Sure, there's a lot of good police officers. I might call the police if I have a problem today. But that doesn't mean we need an officer with a badge and a gun to respond to every emergency. And as someone who's been a former school teacher, just like a teacher can't solve all the problems for a student. I mean, if a young person comes in and you're ready to teach, that doesn't mean that young person's ready to learn. They need to have had a good night's sleep the night before. That means they need a roof over their heads. They need to have some food in their belly. That means their parents need to be able to put food on the table. They need to get love from their guardians or parents. That means their parents can't be working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. One job should be enough. And so you need the whole safety net to have students succeed in school. And that's the same thing for public safety. We need an entire safety net. And so really the movement for Black lives, which I support absolutely, is a movement for social justice and economic equality and requires a national reckoning. And we need to have this conversation. We can't be scared away by some of these tough questions, from the police unions or what have you. And I'm hopeful that as a progressive movement, we'll continue to push these conversations forward so we can have a more just society.
Mike, I appreciate the story, and I also appreciate you being polite. You can tell whatever story you want. We have a pretty open and loose format here, but I want to thank you for the way that you talked about it from an intersectional frame, right? So like racial justice isn't just about the police, right? It's about access to healthcare, and we'll talk about COVID in a minute. It's about access to economic opportunity. It's about, like you said in your story, if you use that $20 bill, what would have happened to you? So what are the psychological underpinnings that people view someone who's across from them? Like, is someone a threat? What does that constitute? And what have we as a society buttressed in terms of what we consider as threats and what we consider as safe? So like these larger discussions need to happen. I love the way that you articulated that. So let's talk about healthcare a bit. Tell me about like how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting Texas 10, but also what you think needs to happen from a healthcare perspective and what you would advocate for in Congress.
Right on. Well, thank you, Reggie, and appreciate the encouragement. Honored to be in solidarity with you today. Big picture, before this pandemic, we were in a crisis. I mean, as just about everybody knows. I mean, 3 rural hospitals. If you were in the middle of the district and you had a medical emergency, you had to make a terrible choice whether to go to a subpar clinic or to drive 90 minutes to deliver a baby or to have an operation. And tens of thousands of people uninsured, tens of thousands more facing bankruptcy in the event of a medical emergency. And I'll tell you, I was the only Democrat in the primary who supported Medicare for All, which is a national comprehensive healthcare program that will make healthcare free at the point of service, no copays, no deductibles. That will mean that no doctor is out of plan, no specialist is out of plan, no hospital is out of plan. It's actually healthcare choice, and it's equalizing, and it gives us freedom in this country to, for example, not be stuck in a job we don't want because it provides healthcare, not to endure a boss who's rude or worse to us because we need that healthcare. To me, it would be liberating to have universal healthcare in this program, in this country. But what I heard on the campaign trail was, I like my answered during this pandemic. One, how do we pay for it? We saw the federal government make trillions of dollars available to well-connected companies to prop up the stock market. Hundreds of billions more in low interest or no interest loans for well-connected companies. But meanwhile, workers in places like Texas were first forced to go back on the job in April before the spread of the pandemic was even slowed, and were forced to choose between losing their unemployment check or going to an unsafe workplace with no security of how that workplace was going to be safe. And so to me, the how do we pay for it question has been answered. We know we pay for what the government wants to pay for, whether it's unnecessary forever wars or tax cuts for the wealthy. And then we also saw with that 40 million newly unemployed in this country, that there's no reason your healthcare should be tied to your job, right? I mean, how many millions of people through it's absolutely the time when we should be fighting for universal healthcare programs like Medicare for All. Because as a community, we're only as healthy as our least insured community members. It's not just a matter of our personal health, it's a matter of community health. And so we have this opportunity to articulate that everyone should be able to have a COVID test. You shouldn't have a barrier to that. You shouldn't fear bankruptcy if you contract COVID. It's not your personal fault that somebody brought COVID to you or you were forced to work in an unsafe place. And the idea that you're going to have a $100,000 bill if you go to the hospital is obscene. And so to me, we have this opportunity in Texas, in the country, to talk about universal health care. I'm running in a district where Lyndon B. Johnson, the person who signed Medicare into law, was the former representative. So to me, it's like, let's just fulfill the vision. Medicare was always supposed to be expanded year by year, from 65 down to 55 and down from there. Let's just fulfill the vision of LBJ. He's no radical. He's no socialist. He was, you can criticize a lot about LBJ as president, right? Especially on foreign policy in the war in Vietnam. But to me, it's common sense. It's the right thing to do. Let's get universal health care.
Yeah, I love that you, again, I can tell you were a teacher because you brought history into it. So Medicare was a down payment on taking care, like it was the down payment for the Great Society, right? So it was like, how do we take care? So the way Social Security took care of people coming out of the Depression, like Medicare was supposed to like take care of people from a health perspective and poverty, right? And it wasn't supposed to just be this one thing. It was supposed to like mature over time. Nixon decided. I won't even go into that, but like, yeah, I will not. Yeah, I can't even believe Nixon came out of my mouth. But anyway, Mike, we're going to transition a bit. So since we just talked about healthcare, I want to the name of the show is Politics and Flows, right? So I want to give you something for so much that you've given us. Then we'll ask about what excites you, ask you more about the campaign, and then we'll roll out. But do you text a lot? Do you type a lot on your computer, Mike?
Too much.
Okay. So put your hands together, clasp your fingers, and just make wrist circles for me. And if your wrists pop and crack, that's your wrist being like, thank you for remembering that I can do this, right? So take those in whatever direction you want. This is like low-key hand yoga, right? So if you text too much and type too much, you're like this the entire time. We're just giving range of motion back to the wrists, right? So now press your fingers in front of you, take them overhead and down 2 more times. Press up, down. Last time, press up. Stay here for 2 breaths for me, Mike. Inhale through your nose. Exhale up the mouth. Inhale through the nose. Exhale out the mouth. Release the fingers. That's it, man.
Right on. I feel
so
better.
let me tell you what we just did. If you're like, look at my hands. This is crazy, right? So we are like this for hours at a time. We just opened the fingers. We put wrists and shoulders in motion. That's healthy. That's yoga. Yoga is not this calisthenic thing to get hella likes on Instagram. That's not what it's about. For me, it's about creating like balance and health in the body so you can be of greater service to your community. So next time you find yourself typing too much, give yourself 30 seconds of that. What I just did. It's good for your posture, good for your wrists, good for your breath. Cool? Yeah, and this is definitely, for all gamers out there. Yeah, for all my gamers out there, like if you're on the sticks too much, you can do that too, right? So this is gamer friendly too, right? Look, I played enough Nintendo way back in the day. I wish we had this way back then. We did. I just didn't know about it. So, Mike, thank you for indulging me there. I hope that you felt better. And that was only 60 seconds, right? So imagine like 2 minutes of that. Oh my God, 120 seconds. So, Mike, in conclusion, just tell me what excites you about where you are in the race. We hear a lot about, oh my God, America sucks and Trump is the worst. Like, we hear that ad nauseum. But one of the things in the yoga classes I teach this week, the theme is reimagine, which requires us to have hope and dreams, right? So what excites you now? Yes, there's a lot of stuff that sucks, but what excites you now in this moment?
I just love working with people and movement building, coalition building. Because I ran on a progressive platform, we've been able to build a broad coalition. And there's that idea to win in places like Texas, you have to run to the middle, very moderate. Don't say anything too.
You have not done that.
But because I have spoken out on these different issues, speaking out against this hateful anti-immigrant law, I've got all this solidarity from the immigrant justice movement. Because I'm a strong labor guy, we walk the picket line with the auto workers. I have a unionized staff. I've got strong support from labor. Because I've spoken out on foreign policy issues, including the demonization of Muslim people in some countries in Asia. The Muslim community in Austin and Houston is coming out big for me. And so whether it's the environmental community, young people, progressives, we've built this wonderful coalition. And to me, the key for Texas, all this talk, turn Texas blue, turn Texas blue. I think the key, we're going to turn Texas blue when we don't just show up in a community and ask for your vote, but rather we ask, how can we serve you? And to me, the highlight of this work I've been doing actually happened in 2018 when, the big moment was in 2018 when we showed up at Prairie View A&M, this historically black college, and the students were being told, you can't vote because you didn't register to vote the right way. We're not going to let you vote on campus. And, basically we responded by writing a letter, showing up, delivering it to the county judge. My staffer who delivered the letter was arrested because he said he worked for a Democrat. It was an absurd situation. We actually went on the Rachel Maddow show to tell the story of this arrest that was politically motivated. But the Rachel Maddow actually told the story of how these students at Prairie View, as some of you know this, that they actually won the right to vote where you attend school for every college student in this country back in the 60s. Maybe you haven't heard this story, but basically when they lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, local officials told those Prairie View students, you can't vote here, you're not a resident. And they took it up to the Supreme Court. They won a case in 1971 called Sim v. US, where every college student in the country can now vote where you attend school. Thanks to the students at historically black college, Prairie View A&M.
That's cool.
And in 2018, when we won this small victory to make sure the students could vote on campus, it got us this attention. But I'll tell you, 2 years later, people still remember that. In black communities in Brenham, in Cypress, these different towns in the Texas 10th, I will knock on doors and be like, oh yeah, I remember you, Prairie View. And to me, on other issues, it's been clean water in this campaign. It's been voting rights in other situations. When you establish this reputation that we're going to fight with you, we're going to be in solidarity with you. We're not just going to show up when we need help, but we're going to show up when you ask for us to show up. That's when we're going to flip Texas. That's when we're going to flip this seat, turn Texas blue, when everyone knows that Democrats show up for everyone. And so to me, that's kind of, my little sermon about how we win races like this, how progressives can win, is this idea of service and thinking of campaigns not just as a vehicle to elect one person to one office, but to promote this kind of solidarity and unity across every community.
I mean, I agree with everything that you said, right? Especially, the organizer in me and the teacher in me. Like, I've found that when I approach my job from an act of service, as opposed to, I'm going to tell you how to do this, like, how can I help you get this done? Right. So like looking at it from that perspective and showing up for someone's humanity, regardless of their partisan affiliation, to me, that's progressive values. I'm actually a registered independent. Don't tell too many people. People will get pissed off about that. But like, I'm a registered independent because I believe in progress. Like, I'm a progressive because I believe in progress. That's not partisan to me. I mean, it has been that way that the Democratic Party has done more progressive things. But, progress is an ideal. It's not a party. Right. So I appreciate what you said. Mike, where can people find out more about your campaign and how to support you?
Well, thank you. Really, if you can spell my last name correctly, you can find me. I've got some signs behind me, but Siegel, Siegel, Siegel for Texas, all spelled out, .org is where our website is. We're doing all sorts of phone banks. We got big phone banks. We've got API, Black phone banks, Latinx phone banks. I mean, whoever you want to talk to, we can set it up. And to me, that's how we beat a guy. I'm running against the wealthiest member of Congress, just about, a guy who has at different points reported $300 million in personal wealth. But, he might be able to buy TV ads, but he can't buy people. And so if we can just turn out, do that work, have those conversations with voters, that's how we're going to win. And for anyone watching, would love to have you involved in this campaign, help us win this race.
Mike, it's great to see you again. We were proud to support you in 2018. Prouder to support you in 2020. Thank you for your persistence and just your willingness to be putting yourself out there in a place where it's not necessarily easy, but it's the right thing to do. So thank you for that. Thank you for your courage and your tenacity. You got my number, right? So holler at me if there's any way I can support you personally or Move On can support you otherwise. And I also want to thank Brianna, Nick, Mike Lewis, and your other staff. Like as a staffer, like I always want to give shouts out to the staff because this stuff doesn't just happen. So props to the staff that worked out the schedule, that got the talking. Like, so thank you for all that. And I also want to thank Texas AFL-CIO, Sunrise Movement, and everyone else who cross-posted this. I'm sure I'm missing someone. Cap Action, and the overall AFL-CIO and DEMCOM. I appreciate you all for supporting this and getting Mike's message out there. Mike, you're doing truly amazing work, as are the groups that I just mentioned. And, we'll do all we can to continue to support you, encourage others to do the same in district and outside of the district. And so we're at another conclusion for episode 8 of Politics and Flow's Big Ideas series. Let's keep doing the work of reimagining and like getting excited about what we're called to create in this moment, right? So yeah, everything sucks in some ways, but it's also an opportunity for us to reimagine where we can go as a nation, as a movement, and as a country. So let's continue this work of reimagining. Mike and staff, thank you for making this happen. Episode 8, Politics and Flows, over and out.
Thank y'all so much.
Elections matter. Justice is on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot when 1 in 5 mothers has hungry children. Justice is on the ballot when millions of people just lost their jobs, many of whom did not have paid sick leave, paid family leave, many of whom don't have affordable childcare. Justice is on the ballot when we look at the disparities around whose children and where they're living geographically have access to broadband to be able to be educated at home, much less have a laptop. Justice is on the ballot when you look at the disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos who have been afflicted with and have died from COVID-19. Justice is on the ballot when people in our country are struggling like they are right now. So we got to get everybody out to vote. We got to take back the Senate. We got to retain our majority in the House. And we need to win the White House and elect Joe Biden.